On the order of the Lowell City Council joint meeting with the planning commission for Tuesday, October 18th at 6:04. Roll call, please.
Mayor Bennett.
Here.
Councilor Harris. Here. Councilor Stratus. Councilor Weathers. Here. Councilor Murray. Here. Commissioner Drop.
Here.
Commissioner Kinsley.
Here.
Commissioner Hall. Here.
We have four. Please stand for the pledge. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic which stands one nation. I see any changes to the agenda they'd like to make? Under new business. We have a couple of people that would like to review the applications and maybe take action. You want to do some there? Mr. Thomas?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Good evening, everybody. Allow me to pull this up in my packet. Mr. Mayor, we have two vacancies on the planning commission. We advertised a notice of planning commission vacancy in the October edition of the Bridge. In that newsletter, we encouraged interested members of the public to apply. We also published the notice on the city website and on the Facebook page. In response, we received two volunteer applications, one from Jason Pickett and Bill George. Jason is with us tonight and Bill is not able to make it. At the meeting tonight, City Council may vote to appoint one or both of the applicants or to take any other action that you feel necessary. As I mentioned, Jason is here tonight and the council may conduct an interview of him or to take any other action. And I'll put this on first in case there were any appointments to enable new planning commissioners to participate in the discussion.
Anybody have any questions of Jason? There is nothing. We have any action we want to take? Jason, take it.
So I make a motion to appoint both Jason Pickett and Bill George.
Okay, we have a motion by Gail, second by Murphy to appoint both Jason Pickett and Bill George to the planning commission. All those in favor of the appointment signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Congratulations.
Jason, at this time, I'll go ahead and swear you in. You're free to join your colleagues. You can raise your right hand and repeat after me. I state your name,
I, Jason,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution and laws of the United States of America,
that I will support the Constitution and laws of the United States of America,
the Constitution and laws of the state of Oregon,
the Constitution and laws of the state of Oregon,
the ordinances and resolutions of the city of Lowell, Oregon,
ordinances and resolutions of the city of Lowell, Oregon,
and that I will faithfully and impartially discharge
and I will faithfully and impartially discharge
the duties of the office of planning commissioner for the city of Lowell, Oregon,
the duties of the office of planning and commissioner of the city of Lowell, Oregon,
according to the best of my ability,
according to the best of my ability.
so help me God.
So help me God.
If I can get you the
Oh, this one,
date and sign. Got some sandwiches over there.
Okay. Oh, I hate this. David.
Yeah, I was looking at work.
Let's just try to get you downtown. Next up is review amendments to the City of Lowell Development Code and discussion. If we might, could we have the three give their names with their companies or who they're representing? Pretty good.
Absolutely, yeah. So good evening, commissioners and council members. Good to be with you. Always a pleasure to be at Lowell. My name is Jacob Hollister. I work with the Lane Council of Governments. The city of Lowell is a member of the Lane Council of Governments. We have provided planning services for several years in Lowell, and so been the planner in Lowell for quite a few years, and then provided various planning assists over the previous decades. So I'm Jacob Hollister. I'm a principal planner, a project manager on this code update. And maybe Henry, you can naturally introduce yourself as well.
Henry Hurley, Associate Planner, Lane Council of Governments. I'm functionally a contract planner for the city of Lowell. I work day to day with Jeremy on planning issues. I'm also a member of this project.
So
Hi, so my name is Zoe Antone. I'm a planner and project manager with Urban Collaborative. We have been working with Lowell for the last 3 or 4 years now, 3 years. Working on the downtown master plan as well as the downtown form-based code. I've been the project manager on both of those projects, so I'm happy to be back. I'm happy to see some familiar faces, and I'm glad to see this moving forward.
now we're gonna be from the very beginning when we started. So, yeah.
This,
Good to see you.
Yeah, we had our workshops right here.
Probably if you want to start this off. What they want to present or who wants to present.
We have one more agency representative.
Oh, I'm sorry. I saw you the last time, so I remember who you were.
I'm Laura Buell. I am. Other
Yes. Thank you.
All right, we'll dive into the presentation.
Who wants to start?
Slides.
They're gonna have a little bit of bleed over. I don't want to adjust that so that most of it's on there. So, this is a project that has been in process for quite some time. We're really excited every step that we have, thanks Lon, to take a little step forward. Appreciate the opportunity we had just a couple of weeks ago to host both a virtual open house as well as an in-person open house, which was nice. So in this room, we had 25 to 30 folks in the room watching a very similar presentation. For those of you who are here, I'm going to share, you recognize some of these slides. So I want to make sure we're getting a consistent background for those who weren't there. And so this tonight is going to be, we can go to the next slide here. I'm going to give a little bit of an overview. One of the things I want to jump out and do at the very beginning is a timeline, which I wouldn't always put at the beginning, but I think the timeline is a really important way to kind of set context for this meeting. So that these groups, the Planning Commission, the City Council, can see how this meeting is nested in our process, what we've done, what we have ahead. So we'll start with that. I want to introduce a code committee. There's some folks present who participated in our code committee, your code committee, that really guided the process to bring us to this point, and then the project management team, which essentially we introduced ourselves. So that'll be quick. Want to set a little bit of the Lowell policy foundation to give us a sense for how this work is really building on a foundation that exists in Lowell's comprehensive plan as it is present. We're going to touch on the downtown master plan. Implementation of the downtown master plan is a key part of the code updates, and it's important to check in on what that master plan had as some key principles, because they'll just permeate that code update. We're going to look then at the key amendment themes. We're going to go over some of those themes. We're going to review a little bit of the feedback that we heard from the public meeting and the virtual feedback that we got, then have some discussion. So I promise you I'm going to go through these expeditiously so that we have some time for discussion. All right, this is a little busy, but there's been a lot going on. So the project ultimately was broken into two phases. And when I say the project, we'll talk about the precursor, which the master planning process was its own project. It was its own thing. There was an adoption in 2019. So that's not even reflected here. That's the prequel to this process. This process began in the late 2020. Phase one, the space between phase one and phase two got complicated, both from kind of macro level COVID stuff, and also some contracting that we needed to engage in to get phase two started. So phase two started in earnest at the beginning of this year. Phase two was really taking themes that we had developed in 2020 and 2021 and start to actually put them down in the code and start to circulate, actual verbiage and iterate on that. We've had some outreach opportunities that we just engaged in tonight is our this meeting to check in with our decision makers. And the circle is kind of what I want to focus on, why I think this is important for this timeline, is that we're presenting to you a sort of moment in time with this draft. And we are going, our next steps, that circle there, really the next 2 months is going to be incorporating what we've heard from the community as it passes through the lens of our decision-making bodies and the directive that we hear from you tonight. So this is really a key opportunity for the Plan Commission and the City Council to discuss some directives for us to bring something back that early next year will come before the community for hearings. So that's what this meeting is about. So we have time ahead of us. We plan to iterate on what is in our materials. We still have some things that need to be honed a little bit. And so this is really to be a working discussion to make sure we get this right. I'm not going to read these out, but you can take a look at the members of our code committee. And so there was phase one and phase two had some overlap, but also some distinction. And so you can see some of the individuals who participated in our code committee and helped us guide. So we would meet with the code committee, we present concepts, we've had conversation. The code committee met most recently, just within the last few months, and provided some really great direction, some really clear direction about perspectives they had on questions we brought to them. Appreciate their help and support. You've essentially been introduced to the project management team. I want to acknowledge that the Transportation and Growth Management Program, which is a partnership between the Department of Land Conservation and Development and the Oregon Department of Transportation. Laura's here representing that group. The city approached the TGM program, their code assistance program, and asked for some help to implement the downtown master plan. This was a pretty natural connection. DOCD helped fund the downtown master plan. They like to see their plans implemented. And so we have an opportunity to support that effort and appreciate the state's help, really. So I'm going to give some policy foundations. So these are sections of the Lowell Comprehensive Plan that you'll see. These are themes that will emerge as we present some of not only the downtown master plan itself as it realized, but also the code updates. Here's some of the themes that this is anchored in. So this is the City of Lowell's comprehensive plan. These aren't amendments, these aren't additions. This is Lowell's current comprehensive plan. So affordable housing, among the means at a city's disposal are code provisions for smaller lots, the provision of multifamily zones in the communities. This is mechanisms for addressing affordable housing as per the Lowell comprehensive plan. These are mechanisms, tools that can be leveraged. Housing costs, The city will continue to seek means of reducing housing costs in the city. Reduced lot sizes, efficient planning, inexpensive construction alternatives can be utilized to maintain housing within affordable limits. Some of the housing policies, I'm going to read a few of these. These are select. You'll see this isn't all of them. This is a few select policies that exist. So the city shall strive to provide all citizens of the community with the opportunity to live in sound housing adequate to their needs at reasonable cost relative to their income. The city shall continue to support increased residential development while also encouraging business and commercial activities that support residential communities. The city shall develop standards for mixed housing and commercial use in its downtown commercial core as a part of a downtown development plan. So this concept of the downtown development plan, we'll talk a little bit about how the city of Lowell's economic development committee ultimately drew from this concept that had existed and wanted to take it a step further, and that's where the downtown master plan came from. The city shall support a wide range of housing types and innovative residential design and planning concepts. Shall support efforts to reduce housing costs by providing enough residential zone land to support a mix of housing types and density that address the needs of its citizens. The city shall maintain sufficient residential buildable lands within the community to provide locational choices for each housing type that will assist in keeping land costs for housing at reasonable levels. The city shall support orderly infill development of underdeveloped land in existing areas. And the land use section has a few goals that have some relevance. So to provide an inviting downtown core area enhanced with mixed uses, sidewalk, bike lanes, landscaping, distinctive lighting, and underground utilities. And then goal 5, to promote residential growth in order to create a more self-sustaining community. So the Lowell Downtown Master Plan, which again is not the only component of these updates, but it is a key component. There's a substantial amount of effort that's gone into implementing your currently adopted downtown master, adopted in 2019, providing some fairly some direction, some high-level direction, which is it's incumbent upon the community to then figure out how will we put this into implementation language that planners like Henry and your other city staff can implement in an objective way. The Downtown Master Plan is a refinement plan ultimately to Lowell's comprehensive. Some of the other components that are included in the updates are these broader TGM principles related to housing in particular, some things around streamlining process to make sure that we're creating straightforward and objective means for reviewing development. And then there's the piece that is part of pretty much any amendment process, which is that kind of administrative piece. There's notes that are in the margins where planners say, when we update this, let's make sure we clarify . So there's some housekeeping things. So quick overview of the Downtown Master Plan. This is an area that was outlined. This area actually shifted slightly in our final version, but this was the plan area that was originally conceived. It included the major public assets in the community, the commercial core, and then the areas in between those. That was functionally the criteria. Hopefully you can see that clear enough. Wanted to show this is right from the master plan. This is the process that we engaged in with Zoe and her team and the city staff and the Economic Development Committee to engage the community in our master planning process. So you can see here, I would hope that folks in this room had a touch point with one or more of these series of focus groups. We had a booth at the Blackberry Jam Festival. We had an all-day work session, design work session, all day that Henry and Zoe can tell you all about, that really stood up some of the key outcomes of that planning process and really tried hard to engage the community in that process. So here's just a few snapshots of some of that outreach. That workshop was very hands-on, markers, highlighters, sticky notes to really vet, and bring broad ideas into more specificity. So it was a real success. What emerged from that effort, those efforts, shall we say, is these 5 goals. So goal 1, what do you want me to admit? Yeah. Goal 1 was a quaint downtown. Goal 2 was a central park. Goal 3 was multi-story mixed-use buildings. You can see there's little taglines under these. I'm not going to read those at this point. This is all on the master plan now. Goal 4 is a variety of homes. Goal 5 is connected sidewalks. Those goals then were distilled further into planning patterns. And so these planning patterns essentially were, what is it that we implement that supports these goals? So that's things like wide sidewalks, paths, walking paths, and use paths, 2-story mixed-use buildings, awnings on building frontages on the street, lined parks with frontages facing the park, gateways. You can see a little graphic that we developed that presented one example of a potential gateway concept. Give folks a sense of entering the community of Lowell. Porches, traffic calming, and street trees. Then the culmination ultimately of these principles was what ultimately becomes the closest thing to an implementation resource, which is this regulating plan. And so it looks much like a zoning plan. These are functionally plan designations. They ultimately guide the zoning that we realize in those areas. If we pulled up a zoning map, you'd see that the colors, and you blur your eyes, it would look very similar because it's not attempting to turn anything completely upside down or inside out. It's really just trying to utilize the kind of existing patterns and add this additional layer. So I'm going to hand it over to Zoe, who's going to describe a little bit about the regulating plan that you see here. Utilizes a planning tool that is somewhat new to most communities in Oregon. Zoe's a bit of an expert. We've gotten on board with this concept, and she's had a lot of success with it, as have communities. I'm going to have her introduce kind of this concept of form-based code.
Perfect. So apologies to people who are already familiar with the form-based code, but I'm just going to do a quick few essential slides. This shows the very basic difference between traditional zoning and form-based code, or a traditional code and form-based code. In traditional zoning, the biggest guiding or organizational principle is use, then thinking about design and then form. In a form-based code, the organizing principle of that code is form. So thinking more about the built environment and the public realm, then design, and then use. So form-based code still talks about use. Some people think, oh, you're getting rid of any use designations altogether. No, it definitely still addresses use. It's that the guiding principle starts thinking about form, so the built form of the public realm or of each area in the downtown, for example. And what does that look like? How should it feel as a person walks down the street and then gets into use? So the building first, and then what goes in it, the activity that's happening in the building is kind of secondary, but it's not bonded together. So that's the difference. So a little bit more detailed than that, traditional zoning kind of tries more strictly to organize according to uses, as we talked, whereas the form-based code preserves more about, is thinking more about community character. Traditional zoning discourages mixed uses and may prevent development in certain areas because of that. A form-based code encourages, actually prioritizes mixed uses and promotes more walkable communities because of that. Traditional zoning attempts to create uniformity by applying parameters like setbacks and heights and density and floor area ratio, which people know that as KR. And form-based code focuses on the role that individual buildings serve in shaping that public realm and streetscape. Again, it doesn't get rid of height limits and things like that. It just doesn't prioritize them. Traditional zoning is more reactive. So to individual development proposals, form-based code is much more proactive because it takes your community vision, applies that, and then sets that as the standard for development going on. So reactive and proactive. And then lastly, traditional zoning is usually prescriptive, using regulations and regulating what's not permitted, whereas form-based code is prescriptive. So using those regulations to describe what is actually required, such as build 2 lines, you know, and including minimum maximum building heights. Ahead of. People should feel free to jump in with questions as well. So this is just an example of the benefit of form-based code. This is a neighborhood in Eugene, Oregon, that allowed, you know, I think up to 3 stories or something, but this was a relatively new townhome. You can see it's attached, but it's attached residential, single family residential. So these are 3 different townhomes. And that fit in with the community because it was a residential community. So you had, you know, single family detached residential homes. And this was built and it fit in with the community. But because there wasn't any form-based code, this was built right next door. And that, while it is residential, did not fit in with a single family residential neighborhood. So the idea is that the townhome, you know, you're increasing the amount of residential units on a lot, but you're sticking with the character of that residential unit. Whereas, you know, right next door, sure, you're increasing the amount of residential units on that area, but it just doesn't fit in. So the idea with form-based code is to allow these different uses, you know, maybe that could have an office or it could have anything, but to stay within the character, the existing character of the area. Do we have time to get into this code itself?
So I think the concept was to introduce at least the building standard sheets as a conceptual.
So, oh, great. So a lot of people are familiar with the zoning code, the traditional zoning code. What a form-based code does is take, you know, a lot of those pages and put it onto one simple sheet. It gives you a diagram, so it's easy to follow, something visual. And then lists the basic requirements. There's a couple notes there on the right-hand side, and then that's it. So it's very clear. It simplifies it. It makes it much easier to follow for both developers who want to develop, as well as people on the planning commission or anyone else trying to regulate on the other side. So a little bit of a zoom in, getting a little bit cut off here, but this is just a zoom in of the downtown flex 2, and I put the regulating plan there. That was the map that Jacob showed earlier. On the left, it's the pink area that's facing Rolling Rock Park. So thinking about that as downtown flex 2, and then the sheet here that I'm showing on the right is the guidelines for that area. So I'm actually going to open it on my computer because that's hard for me to read, but I did want to just walk it through people so you knew what you were looking at. The first one is use. So we do put use up there. Ground floor, we would allow commercial. So that's, you know, service, office, young lawyer could move in there, or an accounting firm, or it could be a little cafe even. So it could be different things, but it has to, you know, continue to have the same character as the other buildings on that street. And then upper floors, you could also have commercial, but you could have, but we are saying that residential, some element of residential would be required, and that was a desire of the city of Lowell during our community engagement process. Is they wanted to make sure that we still had residential in our downtown, so not to fill the downtown with just businesses. So we would say in downtown flex 2 that residential is required on the second or upper floor, some element of residential. Whereas flex 1, which is the red, the darker red there, that you can have as completely commercial. So there's no residential required in the red. So the next group is called placeholder.
Quick question, this continues for the meeting I went to, but on flex 2, so the minimum height is 1 floor.
Right, so that's stuck with your original code.
Was there discussion on it? Because there's required residential and there's only 1 floor.
So if you, the upper floor has required residential, so if it was just 1 floor, then you wouldn't have to have commercials, our residential element according to this code. You could, if you wanted to. So it is allowed. It's just not required on the first floor. Does that answer your question?
So,
I do have a question.
Yeah.
Because we do have residential already within this zone, the flex two zoning.
Yep.
So, there's one lot in particular that's vacant that I know that owner plans on building a single story home on it at some point. Is this code going to change that ability?
Not at all.
So somebody can build a single story home in flex two.
Absolutely. Yeah, so you'll see that where it says ground floor,
Yes.
you have commercial and then we tell you what's in commercial and then residential is also there.
Oh, I see it. Sorry.
Yeah.
Underneath.
Yeah, so the idea is not to, I mean, Lowell. What we heard from the community is that Lowell really likes what you have. You just want to make sure that you continue to develop. Keeping the character that you have. So what we're doing with the form-based code is really helping to streamline, make it more clear, make it easier to follow, make it more transparent. It's actually saves cities a lot of money usually because they have to deal with, shorter planning applications, all those things. But we didn't change a lot of your basic elements because what we heard from the community is you like what you have. So we really tried to stick with a lot of what was already in the code. So the next one is placement. The front required building line. That's instead of a traditional code would say a setback. A form-based code talks about the building line to shape the public realm. So we talk about in this how far forward you have to be. So we say 0 to 10 feet there. That's the frontmost part of the building, so that can also be the front of your front porch. Should be built to the built-to line. Side setback, rear setback, people are familiar with those. We didn't change very much there. Parking setback and parking setback from parcel lines with no required build-to line. So it's a little bit different here where it says 6 feet minimum, but then a 20-foot minimum if you're abutting a residential zone specifically. So making sure that if you do put parking in, next to a purely residential area, you have to be back a little bit farther. Lot coverage, and then anywhere where it says like no minimum or something, there's a C note 3, you can just refer to the right-hand side. And those notes really are following your current code, a lot of them. Height, so minimum floors of 1, maximum 3, and then ground floor elevation for residential should be 18 inches above the ground, but for commercial it can be 0. Floor to floor height of a 10-foot minimum, and then building height, no max, because that's your current code. But if you look at note 4 there, it says there's no building height limitation except when the property abuts a residential zone, in which case the building height is limited to the height allowed in the adjacent residential zone for at least 50 feet. So that comes straight from your existing code. Facade transparency. Facade is just the base of the building. And transparency is just how much of that needs to be clear. So ground floor, we're saying 70%, and then anything above that, 40% for this area. And then parking, there's no minimum requirement. So that's just walking through. I won't walk through every single one of these like that, but I did want to walk through so you understand the groupings there. And all of them, the letters correspond to the diagram above. We did in them, so you'll see downtown flex 1, we're showing a flat roof. Downtown flex 2, we're showing kind of a hip roof. Different things. We did that so people understand that we're not dictating roof pitch, we're not dictating all these really specific elements of architecture. When we talk about form, we're really talking about what the public see, what the person walking down the street is going to see as part of their public realm.
They were definitely in the workshop for the public meetings and questions about how prescriptive the forms were. So that's a good clarification. That it's like, does it have to look, because every house can look exactly like that?
Right, no, yeah, and that's why we tried to do several different styles, so people understood that, we are, we're not prescribing what materials you have to use, we're not prescribing any of the architectural elements, except kind of where your house needs to be. Or where your business needs to be, yeah,
Does the current code have any parking as minimum signs?
I don't think so. There's no downtown, not in the down. So at your leisure, take a look through that. I mean, as Jake showed on the timeline, this is really the beginning, so we wanted to put this draft in front of you. We really have worked hard on it. It's not that we just brought it our down notes. So this has gone through several iterations already. We have, talked to the community, we've gotten feedback, but there's several more iterations to go through, so get out your pen, tell us what you think, for sure.
And this, another thing is, this is consistent with the downtown master plan. Right? Some side.
Yeah, so the downtown master plan, which again was a really big community effort. Did ask for a lot of these elements. And what's great about that is that the downtown master plan didn't stray that far from the comprehensive plan in the first place. And so this doesn't stray that far. So I guess what I'm trying to say is all of this is the purpose is to meet your community's vision. And that's one of the huge benefits of a form-based code is that's the whole purpose, is to meet the community's vision and be prescriptive rather than those. Yeah, any questions there?
So the lots over here on North Pioneer and First that are blue.
Yep.
The one that the city just transacted in the neighbor. Why are they blue public? Because they're residential. So what is the point of is that the current zoning on that?
You can go all the way back to the. Yeah, there you go. With,
What corner are you talking about again?
North-
So if you're on the right hand side of the page, the L-shaped blue.
Oh, yeah,
Is
the
that
city
good?
bought that. The city bought that.
The city sold that.
Oh, they sold it.
With price.
Where the library is?
No, that's the corn they've been hauling filtered in there.
No, that is,
Weakness.
sorry, you're right, that is a public library.
The blue L-shaped lot is the public library.
That is, we're on the wrong corner.
But that's gonna be partitioned off and sold, and
This little piece right here is,
that's. gonna
Yeah.
Okay.
be Rezoned.
Okay.
Yeah, so as soon as that happens, you would change the map, but because it hasn't officially happened, we wouldn't change the map.
I had a couple of questions too, more regarding the more civil. The corner. So 1/3 on North Moss, just north of what Bridgetown Market is actually post office, right there.
You meaning thinking that that's public as well?
It's currently the post office.
Does the post office lease it? or do
Yes,
they own
they
it?
lease it,
Okay,
so
So
that's
that, okay, so that's why it's shown flex to
right,
right there.
yeah, so this follows ownership.
Okay. And then, so my question is. More along East Main Street with the school district. There
Yes.
is 2 lots that are still remaining there that are not school district owned.
Right, so we talked a lot about this actually and decided like this needs to show the most up to date,
Correct.
like 2 days ownership, so that's what it says, and as soon as that changes, we would update the maps.
Okay, so how hard is it going to be to change? I know Henry and I just went through this with the lot right on the. Would be the southwest corner, south Moss and East Main. And we had to. Petition. What's the exact terminology, Henry?
Rezone.
We didn't rezone.
that was the conditional use.
It's a conditional
Yeah.
use permit that we got. In order to build the parking lot there to the school, but it's mixed. Community parking lot, school parking lot. How hard are these other 2 now, with this downtown plan? And the school does. execute the procurement agreements that are out there on. To fold them into public or civil.
Yeah, the owners, so. Again, we had this conversation, it's definitely been like, well, what about the pros and the cons?
Sure.
There's definitely a land use legality vulnerability to establishing designations that are speculative, you know, and speculative is probably not the right word, but it's like, it's incomplete, it hasn't happened yet. And no, the conclusion is, that it's not like when the ownership swaps, because it's public, it's suddenly civic. I mean, there would have to be a process that would be undertaken, and it would be probably one of those skids would be greased quite a bit more than another process, because I think it'd be pretty clear what's happening, and why it's happening. But it's not like it would just flip. So, I mean, it's an excellent point, and it's one of the sort of conundrums of planning at a cross section in time, right? And saying, this is what it is. So, yeah, there would need to be a plan amendment that would make that change when that ownership officially shifts.
Doable.
Totally doable. Happens.
I was saying, you've got a good person on the side.
Yeah, I mean, as far on the spectrum of doable, that's setting the high end of doable.
Right, it's not like someone's asking to rezone it to build a 10-story building or something. I mean, it's.
Right.
The hope is, yeah, if you change ownership, then it will be a smooth process.
Yeah. And the idea that we had hoped that it would have, that would have been possible from the outset, right? It's sort of like the
We changed
intent
as
was,
many of you as we could.
yeah, some of those were changing in process.
I was definitely.
Right before adoption, in fact, at least one of them.
Was there, I don't understand the reason why on North Cannon Street there, the residential attached versus detached. Is there a reason why?
The orange?
That's to
Yeah.
do with your current zoning. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the current zoning shows that as multifamily.
Okay.
So we follow. current.
Yeah, that was one of very few.
Yeah.
Multifamily zone areas, in Lowell's. Downtown, Bangkok Park, Lowell, in Lowell. Let's see.
So I know not to be dangerous, the attached and detached. What are the definitions of those? Is that just, I mean, in the normal realm, that's attached garage and detached garage. What does it mean here?
This is R1 and R3, right? Basically.
So attached is shared wall. So I think townhome,
Like the example she showed on the screen.
Okay,
Oh, yeah.
so attached homes would be, they would share walls, they would have and townhome versus attached, there's some other layer of distinction there.
we're talking condo,
Ish, yeah,
okay,
yeah, certainly ish. There are different models, I think that's the probably most common model, yeah.
Again, kind of beat me to that, because that was my next one. too.
Sorry.
Going further up North Moss, Bill George's developments, he's done over here, the gray apartments and the, you know, coming up, they're already attached, but we're showing them now as flex two, right?
But attached residential would be allowed in West too.
The
As
duplex,
written.
duplexes.
Which. you
So
know,
a duplex
shared
is attached. A
structure.
duplex is counts as an attached. So downtown residential attached can be a duplex, a triplex, townhomes, anything that shares.
Yeah, great question.
Yeah, we didn't down zone anything, right? So flex two allows for what's already there, but it also allows for, if someone has a duplex, they could put a little shop, you know,
Office.
in one side and live in the other.
Okay,
So if I understand right, that 2-3 on south of North Canada there, that's in a point. That's what it would be in the future if somebody tried to change what was there now.
Right.
So right, what's there now isn't there. If this is looking at the future, this is what it would have to be.
Yeah.
And the same way with where the city hall sits. when we want to move off that, that's the designated use of that property.
Correct.
Yeah, for better or worse, anything that's adopted with these code amendments around downtown is going to result in incremental change. Again, for better or worse. These are changes that are going to happen.
Over a long period of time.
So one of the concerns we heard at the meeting, which is a very common concern, is what are you planning to do to my house? And the answer is functionally nothing, unless you plan to do something significant with your house, which that's a relevant question. So yeah, there right now, I think folks, most of you know what's happening in that area, and what that means is that when that property transitions, they'll have these parameters to follow.
Probably a good example, if you look at the 2-3 on South Pioneer and North Shore. That used to be a single residential house on there. Single story, and we had labeled that as a 2-3 flex. And so moving forward, now that that building is gone, we can't, it's not designed to put a single story house. So that was some of those things behind this. Now that there's been a big change in it, we would rather have it be flex instead of residential. So we can get that commercial down there in that downtown area.
So we have a couple other items, maybe we can make our way through some of these other high level themes and then crack it open for more complete discussion, so. One of the key themes is this transition to types. Essentially, currently, Lowell just has, and this is becoming increasingly less common, and the types is becoming more common, where all of these different application types have varying processes, and the type categorization just essentially says, well, let's organize these into basic themes of what sort of notice do they require, what kind of discretion is involved in the decision, where should those final decisions be made, what body does that decision get appealed to, and you set those up into these categories, and you can see essentially you're running on a sort of objectivity discretionary. Well, objectivity and discretion is kind of at odds with one another there. So the modification, sign permit, home occupation, you're mostly doing math problems, checking boxes. And then that increases in complexity until you get to a type 4, like what we're doing here. This is not something that Jeremy should be deciding in isolation or tech. This is something that you, as the representatives, should be making decisions about. And so it seems pretty straightforward, but right now they're not organized that way. And this becomes a good way for the community to understand the process. It's a great way for staff to communicate that and to follow a specific process. So any questions about types? So one of the other things that we want to get your pulse on and discuss is these housing types that are being introduced. And so the distinction I want to really be clear about here is we're not talking about downtown specifically anymore. We're talking about a citywide provision that's being introduced. And accessory dwelling units, Lowell is not a community that meets the mandate that the state issued through some House bills recently. There are communities larger than Lowell who are now outright required to do this. But the point that I think is really important here is that is not because small communities don't benefit equally, if not more, from those. It's just because the state was being measured in deploying that kind of a requirement. And so Lowell stands to benefit from the approach as much as anybody with regard to meeting housing needs. Cottage clusters, townhomes, and single family homes. We've got a couple of looking through some of these examples. So the code is introducing. So another point that's worth meriting, particularly with this group, is that like my neighbor behind me had a legal accessory dwelling unit for many years. It was just one of these things that happens, and then suddenly they were so much more open about it within the last few years, where it was sort of legitimized. I can't point to properties, but I could guess that in Lowell, folks are utilizing this mechanism to address a very primary need that we all have, which is to house ourselves and others. And so legitimizing accessory dwelling units is something, there was a application within the last few years for something that was functionally accessory dwelling unit. And there was this tension about like, it seems like a perfectly fine idea, but our code does not allow you to do that. And so it was one sort of origin component to introducing these. I don't know if this group has questions, discussion that they want questions to raise about accessory dwellings.
I did, I noticed that it said that homeowner occupied was required, whether it's R1 or R3. So I wondered about that, if you're trying to increase density. And maybe a person has a triplex and then an ADU, they have to live in one of the triplex units then in order to have the ADU. And that seems counter in the R3 designation. Could you just require that in the R1 instead, which would be more of a livability issue?
I'm gonna look
I don't think you require that at all. That the new norm in that regard, that we're occupying apartment would be the most.
Well, I thought it was in the stuff we got. I must have read that wrong.
Yeah, it
It's
was,
in your SP.
That creates just another burden to allow these types.
yeah, I think we're on your page. Counselor Weathers, so I was surprised to hear that, so we should make that
Yeah,
a certain.
Ah.
rate.
I'll. No, it was in the actual.
Okay, because I'm
I
looking
think that
at
was
it
one
right
of the
now.
questions, Maureen.
If it's not in there, just read that. It should not.
I was gonna say,
Because it just seemed kind of counterintuitive.
Yeah.
Correct.
It comes about, I've heard Laura in several meetings.
Yeah.
early. That, yeah, I saw in back Laura scrambling when you said that. And your point is spot on, that it really diminishes the.
Especially if you got a multi. Right.
Yeah,
Well, and how are we gonna police that? I mean,
I know of one that would be illegal today, so it's like. Not like. Makes you lawful and legal.
Not me.
so we don't have to bypass opportunity to ask questions about accessory dwellings. Let me introduce another one and we can be asking questions about any of them. So the cottage housing is the concept of having numerous units on a property. I've often heard them framed, and I had an experience in the city of Yoncalla that many of you are familiar with, where it was just a really interesting case study where you had a property owner there were several older folks in town who had the option of either moving to Roseburg or moving to Eugene or having this accommodation within their community where they could have common open area. They could downsize to simply have less to manage and could meet their fixed income needs and stay in the community with them. Is the families. So it just resonated with that city council down there, and they made some changes to make that happen. That's one example of an application of cottage housing, is the aging in place dynamic. Obviously, it's not the only application for smaller units. Tiny homes is sort of one variation on this theme of just trying to accommodate more units on properties in a more accommodating way. And again, someone could have this great idea, go to many communities, and the community say, we like that idea, but our code just doesn't allow it.
I have a question about the parking associated with those, so if there's no parking required, what I'm worried about is a commercial developer coming in and wanting to maximize revenue, not sin. But then especially with say, elderly cottage housing, you have providers coming in often, and when you're gonna make that all go on the street and become kind of a nuisance, it seems like there ought to be a minimum based on occupancy or something so that it doesn't become a nuisance. it sounds good. It sounds like it's just gonna be me and my three-wheeled bicycle when I'm 80 or something, but you know, in reality, you got providers coming. Not just visitors, but actual providers. So it'd be nice to have them.
Laura, you
Well, there is a requirement, it's one space per unit for cottages, and then there's also guest parking. Which is averaged out of cottages. For visitors. So that's,
So, but not necessarily in downtown.
I was just gonna say.
Yeah, no,
That's the
no,
difference. is
right.
that-
Just without the rest. of
that's
the community.
outside, yes, correct.
thank you for that distinction, because it's an important one to make for all of these, is the distinction between the downtown plan and the areas outside of the downtown plan. Where the parking requirement doesn't match the same attention, so Laura and Henry have their heads in those code distinctions more than I do. I think
And it's worth saying repeatedly that not having a parking requirement in the code is absolutely not the same. as Not having a parking.
And all of the yellow zone in the downtown plan still requires one stall, right?
I don't need-
Residential
The
attached.
residential use.
residential, yeah.
And there are increasingly, more and more cities around the country that are removing their parking requirements. And what they're finding is that there's this readjustment happening. It's not that no parking gets built, it's that it gets, because previously codes had just had some arbitrary number, and it truly is arbitrary. And then there's this readjustment where certain places were being required to have too much. And so they then have less. Other places, developers were just following what the code said, and now they're actually making decisions based on their business needs. And they're building just as much parking and in some cases more, if it's a very auto-oriented area. So there's this right sizing. that's occurring.
I'm glad you addressed that, because that's what my concern was. The whole idea is about a self-sustaining community, and I can see that when, if we were big enough to be self-sustaining, and we're never gonna be. Not with our proximity to Eugene and Springfield. And we rely on Fall Creek. We're the incorporated city, and that happened because of the core and systems and stuff. But we rely on Fall Creek to, you know, be part of that self-sustaining, and you're not gonna ride your bike from Fall Creek to come into a restaurant or anything else probably, except for exercise. So what I was hoping is that we were gonna stay with the whole form and character and all of that and understand where we are relative to communities, not talking about Eugene and Springfield and providing parking for people coming out and recreating, that's a whole different thing. But just making sure that we do allow and encourage that again, so that we don't have developers come in and want to maximize the commercial space and then not provide any parking, and therefore it goes into neighbors. Since we're small, we don't have a huge downtown, and then there's a big buffer, and then you're resident. But here that it's not being prescriptive and limiting.
No, not a restriction to do so, but this idea of the arbitrary parking requirements, there's some really interesting anecdotes. I mean, if you go to a community and you see just a lot of asphalt, it's that kind of death of a thousand cuts where it's like, if we had allowed this to happen then on a sort of organic needs-based level, then we might not have ended up with such an accumulation of arbitrarily required parking spaces, which don't do a great deal to contribute to the feel, the look and feel dynamic, right? The
And
concern is
again,
really-
we're talking about cities that got a whole lot of undeveloped land. I can understand that better, but I'm just concerned about how compact we are and how built out we already are. That we just allow that to be part of the.
Some of the tools, I mean, one of the tools of the regulating plan, putting parking in the rear, so you, and it's just the placement of the parking, so that you kind of get a win-win. You created we're not leading with parking lots, we're leading with these you know,
But they're there.
pedestrian scale, human scale environments, but you have this other place to put them. Yeah, it's a totally, it's an excellent question.
Because it's hard for little communities to scale. I mean, I think it'd be harder to scale from a Seattle plan down to Lowell. Given the topography that we have and, you know, all of that, so that it. I'm glad to hear that you're not doing. You're not
Yeah,
just
no, I-
taking the big urban plan and then shrinking
You're
it down
saying it worked
in
for
that
us.
sort of ratio and hope it works, because it's not
Yeah.
gonna always work.
Yeah, I mean, I do think one element of that is, you know, the cautious reliance on on-street parking. Right? So you're, this idea that it is the public right of way, communities do leverage that to with a positive outcome. Sure. So the concern is always, well, what about the gross Winnebago that ends up?
That's just some community parking downtown, you know.
Right. Yeah, excellent question.
I have a question about the minimum lot size, reduction down to 5,000 feet.
Yeah, let's,
What's the methodology in the thought process behind that?
yeah, that's a great question. So, we brought the question to our code committee and said, frankly, posed it as a fairly general question of if one of the mechanisms for addressing one of the concerns that was listed as a key concern about this process is to revisit minimum lot size. Let's take a look at it. So Lowell has, for a comparable city, it has the largest minimum lot size in the county. So there's
What is our current minimum lot size?
7,500 for the R1.
7,000.
Okay,
Oh, 7,000.
because I know our lot is 6,090.
Yeah.
So
So that's, there you go. That's the minimum.
you're non-conforming.
So the methodology, frankly, was, I mean, one way to think about it is this, it's, let's say, you know, what does that mean? What kind of, what is the sort of market support in Lowell? What's a reasonably sized home? You're looking to other communities and how they've, you know, instituted lot sizes. You're trying to establish that. In the downtown area, you're trying to think of really practical things like if those attached dwellings. You can't have too many attached dwellings if you necessitate it really, or you demand and require large lot sizes. But for the other areas of the community, say in the R1 zone, it's evaluating, you know, what, how you can be more efficient about using the land. Can you accommodate a building footprint? What are the different variations of that? That's something we presented to the code committee. And the code committee was sort of pushing us, I would say, in that particular question was, well, let's keep pushing this side. I mean, why wouldn't we go for something smaller? And so that's what we advanced, was those smaller lots.
One element is that there's been a lot of asking for variances to have smaller lot sizes, and that when you see that over and over again, it's usually a really good sign.
Here in Lowell,
Yeah,
But it's new developments, though, the subdivision's not a,
right, not in the downtown.
Right,
that-
that's what I'm
that-
saying. This is beyond.
yeah, see, I get confused when we're talking here about downtown, and then
Yeah.
now all of a sudden we're
yes.
for the broader thing.
Yeah,
right?
this is the broader thing, and those have been. I mean, there could have been some variances related to new subdivisions, but the ones I'm thinking of were lot line adjustments. They were related to properties within town, ways to, or partitions.
But
So
again,
that's-
given that we're small and we don't have thousands of them. I kind of like the individual look to see whether it really fits, because that's what we're trying to do, right? Is
Yeah.
make things fit rather than just say, okay, let's whack everything down from 7,000 to 5 because.
Well,
because.
okay.
I was just gonna say, it doesn't. prohibit 7,000 square foot lots.
Right.
Like you can still have as big of a lot as you want.
Sure, but what cities were those happening in? Are we talking in Eugene where they're cramming them in like a size 10 into a glass slipper? Or are we talking about other rural communities where people come out here because they don't want to listen to their neighbor the biggest thing in the morning?
Yeah.
I mean,
You don't buy that house.
I understand, but I also don't necessarily want to see that here anymore.
So just kind of we just did one of these not too long ago, a couple of years ago. So on the corner of North Pioneer and Second. We had a property that was,
Okay.
we had two houses on what's, I think, less than 10,000, a little bit under 10,000 square feet of property.
Is that Jared's law?
Jared's lot.
That's Jared.
And we had to do a variance for that, but it was close, but not quite. So now if you think about a 10,000 square foot lot, right now, the way we have it set is you can only put one house on it.
Mhm.
And the other half, the other end of the property is vacant yard that just sits there, that may get mowed, may not get mowed, may get stuff destroyed. By at least giving that down to 5,000 square feet, if somebody wants to develop it and build a house there, we have that opportunity to grow a little bit more on our side without being restrictive, saying, hey, it's 6,000 square feet, you can only build one house, or it's,
One-offs, I think, are fine, like Maureen was saying, if it's a case by case, but are now, I mean, are we gonna see this next development that's going in? Like, over here, wait, where am I? Sorry, I'm so fresh. Carroll or Jazzy Loop or whatever, are we gonna see those being this super dense
I think that's a
Now,
good question.
development
Yeah.
in the city? I don't know.
Yeah, that to me that's the tip of the spear of that question. I do think that the one-offs are kind of what you're gonna see in the established part of town. I mean,
Sure.
This is gonna be somebody saying. I mean, we've done these analyses where you say, well, let's look at everything that's over 10,000 square feet. And literally just run the analysis of like, how many partitions are we talking about? And then, of course, it's gonna be some dramatic percentage of that, because one of them has a house in the middle of the lot. We're probably not gonna rip their house down to partition. And then there's just the percentage of people who's like, I like the property. Partition it, right? So you're talking, the one-offs, I think, is the way to think about existing development impact from this. Your question about, okay, so what kind of neighborhood will the next subdivision be because of the new R1 zone? And the market is obviously gonna drive that as far as like what kind of places are marketable in Lowell. The other point that is just so important to raise in this is that we're trying to provide, like, when we look at the question of, I think of family members who are professionals making pretty good wage and cannot get a home for their families. Like this is one of the mechanisms that we do that, and Lowell is an urban community. It has an urban growth boundary around it. And in Oregon, what that means is that this is where urban uses go. And so we don't shove it down throats, but it's something really important to consider. Is one of the answers to this question. Where are the teachers going to live? Where are the other professionals who need it? Again, that housing needs analysis is about income and housing stock. How do you line those up? And what's happening is everything's drifting to where it's like, yeah, it turns out we can't accommodate certain people, or folks have to leave home to find a place to live.
And the city's comprehensive plan supports this, as you went over at the beginning of the presentation.
But Jacob, I'm glad you brought that up, because we talked about this at the open house. We haven't had a housing needs assessment here. Where we have, on one of your maps, it shows that the zoning, the underlying zoning is R3 and it's developed as single family. So that's misleading. To think, oh yeah, we've got enough R3 and we don't. And that's a classic way here to help, because it differentiates you know, for types of housing, that aside from cost, which obviously affects us, but so. You know, I'm not recommending we stop everything and go back and do that, but boy, because we're small. And it makes such a difference, whether one empty parcel is zoned a certain way or not. We don't know what we have. And I feel uncomfortable making those kinds of decisions on lot size when we don't even know what we have.
So I 100% agree with you. And I did not do a housing needs assessment, but I did get some numbers down, because I've been thinking exactly about this question. So I wanted to put it in perspective for you a little bit. So in 2010, the population of Lowell was 1,058. At that time, you had 436 housing units. That's an average of 2.4 people per dwelling. So that's your average household size is 2.4. In 2022, this year, your population size is 1,221. Your current housing units are 505, which comes to per housing unit of 2.4. So very consistent. You had a growth in population from 2010 to 2022 of 163 people. In that same 12-year period, you had a growth in housing of 69 units. So that is a little over 5 houses per year on average. So we're not talking huge developments going in. So in 12 years, you had a little over 5 houses built every year in Lowell. Your housing unit size didn't change at all. So 2.4, still 2.4. According to the University of Portland Housing Study, the 2045 population projection is 1,566 for Lowell. It's a big projection, that's really far in the future, but they do the study, so I took their number. If I take the housing unit size of 2.4, which has been consistent over the last 12 years, and I apply that, it means that in 2045, 23 years from now, you'll have 648 housing units. That's a growth of 143 housing dwelling units, and that equates to an average of 6 houses built per year over the next 20 years.
But
So-
can we accommodate that growth, given that our city limits and UGB are the same boundary and it's unlikely to extend that? And that's what I'm talking about, and that's what I brought up before, because if
Yeah.
it's all flat ground with no
It's-
wetlands.
Yeah, it's the question that
I can see
every community is required essentially to answer. Or you have your 20-year land supply or your land supply for the planning period that you've identified or that the state requires. And I would agree with Zoe, these probably do have the land to meet that at this point in time.
It'd be, I mean, you want to look at it, but I think
I mean, I saw HNA on the spot, housing
Yeah, yeah.
houses be a lot.
I like.
So that's tricky, but I think the point you're making, Zoe, is that,
It's not.
right, this idea that 4,500, 5,000 square foot lots are gonna pop up. It's, and the idea of the minimum lot size not being, this is, in Lowell, we build homes with 5,000 square foot lots. It's, no, what we've done is we've said we're trying to accommodate as per the comprehensive plan, a range of housing types. One of the ways that we do that is we allow lots at a smaller size. And we also, we haven't done anything here that would prohibit lots that are at the current size or larger. So, it's a good question. I think it's a really valid concern. I'm not gonna dismiss that concern. It's the concern I think that comes up in any communities. We worked with the community of Coburg, and it was really interesting. One of the analyses that we did was ask them what did they kept saying, like, we want to keep the character of our community. So, well, what is the character of your, what is, and like, oh, well, let's say, and there was kind of this consensus, it's like this part of town. And you go in there, and they have lot sizes all over the place. Yeah, really small lots mixed with other lots, obviously that's the ideal. But it's interesting to see some of the properties that they were most drawn to that really established their character with some of these small lots. And so they have had some development out there. I think there are members of that community that said, we think that those homes out there are on lots that are too small. They provide a lot of housing to folks, young families who were able to keep their school in place that was on the verge of closing years ago. So the comprehensive plan has outlined some directives, policy directives to visit and consider these dynamics. And so that's what we proposed. That's what the code committee advanced as something to consider. And that's what we look with these bodies to help us calibrate them.
So I know in the past we have had some slow growth, but in the last year, how many houses did we build? How many houses were built in Lowell? 30,
Jeremy,
33?
you reviewed that.
More than that, 31.
31 homes.
Because we were under water moratorium there for a while.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
A lot of things. so
We
It
bought our
wasn't
house
just open
because
for
there
development
was
here,
a building in water moratorium in 96.
even later.
Yeah, and it went for probably another 8 years after that. So I mean,
We've only moved about the last 3 years.
Right, so it's kind of a.
So when you project this, how many a year, it's, to me, it's partially economics and stuff. It's also partially what we have available, and that's why I just don't feel comfortable with that. I wish I knew how to do one myself.
Forecasting can also be sort of circular. So they say, well, our forecasting has been based on what you've done.
Yeah, the
Historically.
population projection is always, that's why I say that the 2045 population projection. I mean,
The fact that we're going 6 years, 6 units per year forward based, and we've done 6 units per year in the past is one way to summarize how PSU sometimes they say, well. So it's self-fulfilling prophecy, right? So,
right, but we have how many units in the hopper that are ready to roll? I mean, I know of 4 developments that have been approved.
yeah.
And
right, so if people are filling those just as soon as they're being built, then this population projection is probably.
it's blown out, just like everything else.
So one interesting thing to do would be to do we're not contracted to do this, but maybe Henry or I could do it recreationally. It's just like the buildable lands inventory kind of light.
Right,
We
where
do
are we
these
with
enough.
goal 5? That's my question, is where are we with the state with goal 5?
We have
and-
wetlands that
And
are-
well, not just the wetlands, but I mean our buildable lands.
Yeah.
And everything else that.
Yeah.
We are, as a city, are
Yeah.
required to.
There's a very high level, I mean, buildable lands inventory is pretty thorough, but there's a pretty high level version of that. Again, we do them all the time. So you can kind of slap those layers on and kind of say, it looks like these are probably the lands that we develop. If nothing else, it would add a layer of understanding to anytime there's kind of this ambiguous fear and then you put it on the map and I highlight things that can be helpful to say, well,
That's what I'm saying. I just feel weird that we don't know that. And it might be fine. I'm sure it probably is, but normally we don't go to meetings and make things well, we think it's gonna be okay.
Right,
But as a policymaker, that's not a comfortable position to be in. So what does it take? What would it take to get this done? That wouldn't hold up the whole 9 yards? What do we need to do?
and you're asking about the analysis,
Mhm.
the
The light?
right.
LITE.
Yeah. No, I think we have to.
I mean, if so much of this is driven on housing, it seems like that's a pretty dang
Yeah.
important.
So,
But
I mean,
if the land's not there, we can't build homes. If we go down to 5,000 square feet, it gives us that extra opportunity to grow with the thought that there may be that coming in. If we stay at the 7,000, we're limiting that number from coming in.
I understand
And
that.
so I think,
That's why we want to know that.
right, but I think if we were to say the 5,000, that still gives us that safe zone. You don't have to, they don't all have to be 5,000. So if we say we can take them down to that, that's gonna allow us to have a little bit more growth.
Generally,
If it does come.
developers are gonna go lower than higher because that's more cost effective. They're not worried about
Right, but-
livability and what's
I
left
mean,
behind when
I'm
they
looking at
go up.
2,700 square foot home on a 5,000 lot, that's a pretty good sized house. So it's, it's not too, to me, it's not small. Yes, they might be closer together, but it's not necessarily a small house. 2,700 square foot house is pretty good size.
No, yeah, and you can go to these open houses where, yeah, like she said, you're looking out your window and you're looking right at there and it's like New York City apartments, I mean, you're literally that close. I'm not talking about the size of the house necessarily, but just the livability,
The setbacks.
and why, you mentioned why people come out here in the first place.
Well, and why we're all out here not living in Eugene. And I mean, because we all are free to go live in Eugene, but we chose not to. So I just, when you were talking about the group that got together and they like what we have. I think that changing it down to 5 is going to drastically change the landscape of what we have. So unintended consequences, yes, it's great, we can squeeze more housing and you can get, as opposed to a 15,000 square foot lot, as opposed to 2, now you can get 3 houses on there. I just think that, these kind of groups have a tendency to just go, oh, yes, you're the experts, let's do this. And it's been through every iteration and chewed on and this, that, and the other. But it comes through this process for a reason, and I just, I don't know, I guess I'm not comfortable with the 5,000, but I'm just one person, and there's 12 others at the table.
We didn't, just for clarification, we didn't change any of the setbacks, so the setbacks are still the same, so technically today, 2 homes on 2 7,000 foot lots can be just the same space apart as 2 homes on 2 5,000 square foot lots, so that actually doesn't change how close houses can be together. Right now, houses can still be, like today, 2 houses on 2 separate 7,000 foot lots can be built right next to each other.
Sure, no,
does that make
mine-
sense? Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I mean, my neighbor and I think we have 6 feet setbacks from the
Yeah.
shared fence line.
Right, so that's the same, so that's the same.
So I would maybe propose that, and this is an issue that is common point of discussion. It's one that we listed as a key amendment because we know that this is something that folks have feelings about. I don't know if others want to capture their perspective on it. I mean, what I would propose is that the project management team take this into account, develop something that reflects the concerns that we've heard. To Councilor Weathers' question, I mean, I don't think that we, other than some kind of an anecdote, we really have the bandwidth or time to perform any kind of extensive analysis. I think, one of TGM's principles is that they look towards planning that tries to avoid expanding urban development. So to Chief Drott's point, the idea that you do more with the land you have. So does anyone want to share another perspective or thought about the minimum lot size question that we take back and kind of marinate on and try to bring something back?
My question was, what is the average minimum lot size for other small communities in one county? It would be really interesting to the point of making a decision without knowing. It'd be interesting to hear back from leadership in those communities, what the response has been when they changed their minimum lots.
Yeah.
If they went through this process, they thought it was going to be chaos. And a lot of frustration in the community, and that didn't really happen. That would help us understand what we might be facing.
That
There's a
would be-
lot of concern, but if the average community lot size is 5,000 square feet, I'm not really sure to see what that concern is.
That would be an undertaking, but less of an undertaking in this analysis, mainly because we have relationships in all these communities.
And I think one suggestion that you all get that on, but if people on this room aren't concerned, we could reach out individually and just ask for perspectives.
Yeah, we do have a unique line on that information, and we're the keepers of the spatial data. So we could, that's analysis that we could run, and if we felt that that would be helpful in easing angst about that. I mean, candidly, I would say the pivot from 7,000 to 5,000, it's, you know, we were encouraged to do that, and said, okay, we'll propose that. It's something that can be revisited, for sure.
The thing about comp cities is that we've got a lot of slope in our town that other communities don't. And I think that does make a difference. I'm all for looking at it, because I think finding best practices out there is cheap and easy way to go. There's no sense in ignoring what's worked elsewhere. So I'm not saying not look at that, but it's got some unique features here that I don't know how it affects it. And I'm not saying it's negative or positive. I just don't know.
I would think that functionally, though, that kind of slope will incline the developer to have larger lot sizes. Just naturally, because
There's
they're
an example of Coburg, you know, they're flat.
They're
It's just
flat.
flat out there, so, you know, they can just go to the corner.
Yeah.
The other thing is, when I hear 5,000 square feet, I'm thinking of your attached condos, duplexes, things like that. Where 7,000, I'm still thinking of residential houses. So I don't know if there's a way of. You put this in there, 5,000 would be acceptable if you're gonna put a home on at 7,000. I don't even know if that exists, but if that's possible. But, it seems like people with single unit dwellings, probably like 7,000, where, you know, if you're gonna live in a duplex condo, you know, you're not worried about the square footage of the whole lot. Yes, ma'am.
Oh, I didn't want to cut you off.
No,
Oh, okay. I was just gonna point out that you do have coastline development standards, so those would apply and deal with the issue of slope independent of.
But I didn't see that it was relative to lot size. It was just relative to buildable at all. And
Right, but it addresses the issue of property. So you can set lot sizes, but then you have these full-site development standards that are intended to address any problems associated with it.
so
I didn't
the
see
plan
drainage in
leverages
there.
those.
And then, for attached dwellings, actually 5,000 square feet is much too large. For attached dwellings, the lot size has to be significantly smaller, because otherwise there's just too much land. And those developments, so we wouldn't allow, so 5,000 is actually, I live in a 1,000 square foot lot. 110 year old house, and it seems like it's making. Yeah, it's a for single family dwellings. So
Any other perspectives to share on, this is good, this is what we're coming.
Sounds like we need more education on what like other than just
You're right. Yeah, you know, so I mean, one of the things I mentioned is over example that what we did is we took pictures and the people who walked through town their whole lives. Like, oh yeah, that's the old whatever place. It's like, yeah, that's on that's not the way.
That would be really.
Okay, yeah.
My last question, you have parking in the back is part of the standard,
In the downtown.
That's just.
just the downtown, okay, thank you.
So let's see, so. It feels confusing. trying to dial it in to be understandable. Let's see. The other updates, flood hazards, this council approved the flood hazards updates, so it's really just an ordinance that needs to be folded into the code, so it's an update that. It's one of these housekeeping things that let's just, when we do an update, let's bring those along. Access, Henry, do you want to talk about some of the access?
Yeah, access is existing language. We're just trying to make it a little more clear. We've struggled with it in the past, other developments. Basically, your lot has to put the right way for at least 16 feet, well, which has to be paved and have to pay pavement. So there's no real change. We're just kind of clarifying it, saying that, yes, you have to have that paved.
This is one of those staff headaches, where Henry says, when we do this, when we do an update, please clarify what this happened.
If the street is unimproved,
If the street is unapproved, the city will allow you to defer that pavement until it's time. That's happened in multiple cases.
House Bill 4064, this is another thing that wasn't part of our scope, but is something that we're folding in as part of the process because there's an efficiency from folding it in while we're doing it now. So looking at our time, okay. I just wanted to touch on some of the feedback that we got both from the virtual surveys. I'm just going to read through these and we can, maybe what they'll be is things that you can kind of riff on or ask follow-up questions on, but this was the online survey. So we're talking about just the other slide that we're going to see is representative of a group of 25 to 30 people. This is a group of 9 respondents to the online survey who engaged in that way. So some of the things that we've talked about, some of these I doubt will surprise you, a desire. So these are just themes that we're pulling out. They aren't, it's not like 9 people said them, but they're themes that popped out. Let's say what it was. Desire to remain small and rural. Downtown plan and proposed amendments take away from the reasons why they moved to Lowell. Acknowledgement that Lowell is in need of a facelift, but not at the expense of the small town atmosphere. General support for varied types of housing types, such as ADUs and cottage clusters. Some respondents did feel like permitting non-traditional housing types makes Lowell like Eugene, Springfield. General support for reduction in minimum lot sizes. Respondents understood lower minimum lot sizes means greater density and more housing. Surprised to learn that Lowell had one of the highest minimum lot sizes in the county for similar sized cities. Some respondents prefer the large lot size due to the rural style of living it provides. Question fire safety in response for having more dense development. Let me read these other ones. Share. So the in-person community open house. Wants us to raise taxes. You have a document in your packet that is essentially a Q&A that we prepared that shows our answers to these. And those of you who attended the meeting, we responded to these questions either as a group or individually. What about safety and security associated with increased activity in Lowell? Do the proposed amendments only address downtown? What are the implications of these amendments for my future plans? Will the farm-based code is only cookie cutter development? Will private property be acquired to address master planning needs? Residents mentioned desire to be involved earlier in the conceptual and draft amendment process. Difficulty finding amendment materials. General positive feeling about form-based code. What may my neighbors be motivated to do with decreased minimum lot size and regulations? Some skepticism about off-street parking. That housing is too expensive to meet existing demands. So, these were some of the key questions that we got. We have some answers to these. The staff that participated in that meeting really had a generally good pulse, frankly, on the proposed amendments. So there were a lot of people who were pleased with the concept of the farm-based code. A lot of the questions that folks came were answered in that meeting. And we heard some generally positive feedback. we've provided some of the key questions that we've heard there. Interested if that sparked any thoughts. Your materials have some summaries of those, or that feedback. These are things that we're trying to fold into the next iteration of the code. And so, I'll just share this and then we can crack it open. This is just, again, a more succinct revisit to the schedule. We're looking at, the next couple of months is a revisit to the code. It's looking at, these other iterations. We're hoping at the beginning of next year to come to you all individually for specific hearings. And ideally, moving forward with some code. So by spring of next year. So those are the key matters that we wanted to bring to this group. I think we've had some good conversation. I don't know that there are clearly a couple of key things that I don't think they're going to get resolved here. There's some work and some research to do. The project management team has some more work to do, and what I did hear though was some key issues. I hear minimum lot size as a key issue. I hear parking is something to make sure we just got dialed in and clear. And maybe others can help me come up with this particularly short list, but we've been taking good notes and plan to ripple those ideas back through. And this is the time to iterate, and obviously there'll be another opportunity for hearings.
Now, are you guys gonna do the pulling of the information on that minimum lot size, or do we need to,
That's something we can do.
is, okay,
Yeah, we can make that. We just have,
because you're right, we don't know what we don't know. I mean, I'll admit that. The perception for me is a little, not what I would want to see, but
Yeah.
maybe it's perfectly fine.
no, and it's absolutely natural. It makes sense to just look around, right? They kind of pause and say, well,
I don't like to recreate the wheel.
Yeah, the reason I volunteered that is because that's work that we tend to do on a reasonably regular basis. We probably have something that just needs some minor updates. And then we have the data as well, so,
I love looking at data.
oh, good. Good spirit.
Not, I don't remember like it read to me though. I wanted your, whatever.
You want to play?
I can,
Hard to keep straight in my spreadsheet.
I'll send you some.
I just want to jump in and say, I don't know if it's a part of this process. I really appreciate all the work you did. It's very helpful.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's important. You have a very real responsibility to represent the community as well. So we don't take that lightly either. We look to you, so. We look to you, we look to the comprehensive plan that your predecessors developed, and we try to reconcile, so, yeah. Okay, I don't know, Jeremy, I guess I'll pass it back to you. That's kind of odd.
Any questions, anything like that before we adjourn the joint meeting?
Mayor, before we adjourn, we do have a 5-minute break scheduled for anybody who is online and wants to attend the city council meeting, the regular city council meeting. You'll need to go on to the meeting link for the regular city council meeting. It's a separate link to sign into that. We will be taking a 5-minute break and then going right into the regular council meeting.
With that, we're adjourned the joint meeting at 7:43.